It's great to see you all again. I always have to take just a moment when we walk out on stage to take a big, deep breath, to be at this very stage looking out and seeing what this mission has grown to over the years is humbling, inspiring, really driving for the folks that are in this work day in and day out, all of you included, as producers, as tribal leaders, and as community members. It's my distinct honor today to bring together this panel for you all. Today we are joined by Sarah Vogel, attorney, advocate, and author of The Farmer's Lawyer. We have Porter Holder, a third-generation Choctaw tribal producer who on his operation is welcoming the fourth and fifth generation, so a multi-generation operation there. And we have Zach Ducheneaux, the USDA Farm Service Agency Administrator. Today, our hope is to truly take a journey through credit access in Indian country, talk a little bit about what is happening, and we really think that we can't set that stage without giving an opportunity to get a look into the work that we do present day. So we're going to transition to a video, and we're going to give you all a look at what we do day in and day out, and then we're going to come back to telling this story of credit where it is due. So today's conversation is going to be centered around access to credit and repairing the relationship in our food systems and being able to access that credit. The efforts that have taken place over generations and how the IAC and our allies and our producers and our member tribes have been a part of informing that journey. Sarah, I'd really love to hear from you first. So often there are leaders and mentors, community members, elders that inspire us and even call us into this work. As you look back to those that have motivated you to join credit reform efforts over the years, do you have any stories or anybody in particular that really comes to mind to have called you to this space?
I would say that the origin of a lot of the work that I did on the Keepsiegel case, which came later, was because of the Coleman versus Block case. I'd been back in North Dakota a little while. I'd done stints at the Federal Trade Commission. I was in charge of equal credit opportunity. And I knew a lot about the law, that law, and I also knew that Native Americans were not being equally treated. And so when I did the Coleman versus Block case, I reached out, which was actually unethical. Lawyers aren't supposed to solicit clients, but I did. To I wanted a Native American plaintiff in that case to illustrate that bad as white people were being treated, Native Americans were being treated worse. And I he found me, a guy by the name of Lester Crowshart, who was a rancher from Fort Berthold. And listening to his story, I mean, it was worse than the worst story I had ever heard from a lot of white farmers and ranchers who had suffered terribly as well. So I had Lester and Sharon Crowshart as lead plaintiffs in that case, but that case did not address discrimination. It just dealt with notice of ability to apply for deferrals and to stop foreclosures and so on. So it remained to be done. That work needed still to be done. And then in 1999, I heard about another case that was going to start about class action under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And then I jumped on board that case thinking, well, this will be an easy case. About 3 months shy of 20 years later, it wrapped up. So I learned quite a bit about litigation and Native Americans. It was like a lot tougher than litigation with white farmers and ranchers. So I'm grateful for having the experience, and I certainly learned a lot, and I I have to say, like in retrospect, tough as it was, I enjoyed every minute of working on the Keep Siegel case.
So it sounds like there were really key people that you were able to make connections with, and that they became long-lasting friendships, because there was a lot of work to get done over the years.
It was I was struggling. I didn't know much, and every once in a while, I would get just dropping in a guy by the name of Greg Smithman and another guy by the name of Ross Racine, and they would just call, "Hey, we're in town," and we'd go out for coffee at a 24-hour coffee shop, and like when the sun came up, we would be done talking, and they taught me so much, and they connected me to so many people. And then when I did have clients who were Native American, I could call on IAC, members of IAC who came and did this one-on-one work that was so critical to keep farmers and ranchers alive. So, yeah. And then they had this young kid called Zach Ducheneaux with them.
Young kid. Well, let's hear what he remembers from that time frame. Zach, I'm going to turn to you. Any stories or messages that have really driven you over your years in this work?
Absolutely, a lot of them. Those meetings with Sarah were very poignant and meaningful for me. Some of the folks that we had the opportunity to train with when I first came on as a farm advocate for the IAC just under 30 years ago. Luann Kling, Randy Roth, Clarissa Mandan, who was kind of the penultimate farm advocate. I remember one of the stories that she told me about trying to ensure accountability at the Farm Service Agency, then it was Farmers Home Administration. And her whole case turned on the fact that while she was on the phone, she took a note on a trash bag or a grocery bag and wrote that note out so she had a record. And it's one of the things that I've tried to stress to everybody that's working with the FSA now. We all do a receipt for service, but your notes matter. So if you come in and work with one of our offices, learn the stories from the past and bring those lessons to the future, so that the work that Clarissa and Luann, God rest her soul, and Randy and Sarah have done doesn't go for naught. We've got a lot of opportunity before us now with some of the changes that we've made based on recommendations that they suggested. But it's going to be up to us as stakeholders, citizen stakeholders in this government, to continue to ensure accountability.
And Porter, what about you? Do you have any particular stories or experiences that helped you to really recognize as a producer you had to have a voice to speak on behalf of other producers?
For me, what motivated me the most was once I become a lead plaintiff for the Keep Siegel was the elders. I mean, I'm just a simple rancher, but listening to the elders and the disrespect and what they went through kept me motivated to do better, to know there was better out there, and that we were able to do better. Being a lead plaintiff, our personal information, phone number, address, email was all put out front, So I fielded a lot of phone calls back then from just elders that had been that didn't have the platform, didn't have the grit, to take the fight. It was the elders. This man next to me right here, ever since I met him, has motivated me. His work ethic is non-comparable. I mean, so there's been a lot, but mainly the elders just trying to, keep that light going. So
Yeah. So I just want to make sure the audience hears this. We heard reference to the young fella, and we've heard about the elders, and recognizing this is a multi-generational call to action. This is something that we all collectively in our community need to come together around, and to be able to work across these generations for the generations that we've not yet had the privilege of being able to welcome into this work. And I really think that there's a lot there that centers this effort around strength coming in numbers. And so thank you all so much for sharing some of those personal stories about what called you to this work. And I'm curious, when the Intertribal Agriculture Council came into the fold for you all in your mission to improve access to Indian producers and their access to credit, was there a distinct point in your career where the IAC and other ally intertribal organizations may have really presented that outlet for support or filled a void that wasn't quite there for producers who needed access to support in getting credit?
Yes, I didn't really know about. Of course, you got to go back. What's it been, 20 years or longer since Keep Seagull started, and I didn't really know about IAC until I got into the thick of this, and the voice that they brought to the table for the Keep Seagull case, the work ethic. I mean, it was. That's when I learned about them, and I've started now in Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma, I got Jeff Caskey, Quentin, yes. And I mean, anything, they can help you navigate the water. I mean, IEC is growing. I actually watched it grow the first time I was around to know what it was to what it is today. I mean, it's the traction, and I know part of that is to do with the previous administration, Zach and Ross. So, but it's quite the organization. It's growing, and for a native farmer and rancher, if you need help navigating the waters of USDA, they have technical assistance in your area, or that will come to your area. Like I said, Jeff Caskey, Electa Hare, Quentin. I mean, they're in my area. You can't have a better tool in your tool chest if you're trying to navigate the waters of that. And I'm honored that IAC asked me, of all people, to come sit up here. I haven't figured that one out, but I'm very honored to represent IAC here. Yeah. So, thank you.
And Zach, having been a technical service provider, a farmer advocate early on in your career, how has that informed the work that you've been able to do on behalf of the Farm Service Agency the past 4 years?
I'd like to think that I've kind of carried that work ethic and that commitment to producers through into the role at the Farm Service Agency. And a wise young lady told me, as I was talking about needing to train farm advocates, she said, "Jesus Christ, Dad, you got 10,000 of them out there in the countryside. Get your staff to be farm advocates." And I thought, well, that's a very good point. So we worked really intentionally to help our staff understand that we're supporting them and we're untying their hands so that they can be the producer advocates that they all want to be. Because while there are bad apples in every group that threaten to ruin the whole bunch, there are an overwhelming majority of staff out there in those county offices that want desperately to help people. And they need to feel like they're supported if they take that extra step or go that extra mile, because once every year they get calls from the OIG or the GAO and they get audited for the work that they're doing. And if they don't feel supported by leadership, if there isn't an actual farm advocate at the head of the Farm Service Agency, they're kind of left to the wolves and left to defend the things that we've been pushing them to do. So as we try to empower them to help producers, we've got to make sure as leadership that we're there to support them when they do go that extra mile, because a lot of our staff really do. The things we've been able to do in this farm loan rule really are going to let staff heal that relationship between Indian country and all producers over the next 20 years, if we can just hold that all together.
And Sarah, you know a thing or two about being a farmer advocate. In Backstage, but also in your book, The Farmer's Lawyer, you talk so much about the role that you played through many eras of just hearing the stories, helping to try to process the stories, being mad as heck about the stories. Talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you learned, whether that was through the depositions or through working with producers, and if there was ever any distinct way that the intertribal organizations played into supporting your work as the farmer's lawyer.
I would say that IAC was absolutely critical to the success of the Keep Siegel case. All of the lawyers but me were based in Washington, D.C. I think none of the lawyers but me had ever worked with Native Americans. So I think I helped introduce the legal team to IAC. And of course, there was Clarissa Mandan from Fort Berthold. And then there were other people in this network. And I just want to talk, one of the depositions that I did, and there were a lot of depositions, and the case went on for almost 20 years. But I worked on one deposition that that it has a lot to do with the origins of the IAC. It was a deposition of Greg Smitman. It was one of the very last depositions that was done in 2009, shortly before the case settled. And I'm going to start at, if I can, Kelsey, may I?
Please do.
Greg was asked about the origins of the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and so he talked about how it formed, and he said, and they're very optimistic, you know, he and his group. So they went out to Washington. So I got to read this from the deposition. Page 94 of a deposition that's 258 pages long. So he said, one of the stupid things we did, we traveled to Washington, D.C. initially, right off the bat, and we met with cabinet level officials. We met with the Secretary of Agriculture. I've forgotten his name, 87 or 88, ugly guy. And that was Secretary Ling. I forgot. We were with. I remember there being the most respected Indian leaders in the country sat on the board of the IAC at the time. Some of them were tribal chairmen. And we were sitting in the office of what they called the glass room, USDA, the secretary's office. And we said, hi, good to meet, good to see you. And they said, why are you here? And I believe it was Fred Smith, but it might have been Bob Miller that started to speak and said, we're here because we're representing the Indian agriculture, and we would like to talk with you about services from the USDA. And the Secretary of Agriculture, Ling, the ugly guy, stood up from his chair, walked over to the window, and pointed across the Washington Mall and said, I believe you need to be over there at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We don't work with Indians here. And that's the beginning of the IAC history with the USDA, because nobody in the room could believe he had actually said that. And he was absolutely sincere about it, and he was accurate.
And yeah. So when we talk about the people who come before us and doing this work and speaking and breathing life into the mission of what brings us all to this conference today, and why I have the distinct privilege of being able to be on the stage with these folks, it really compels me to say, what were we talking about in the back, Sarah? We showed them. We showed them.
We certainly did show them. The Native Americans have a place at USDA, and you know, it was a long, hard haul, and I'd sued USDA many, many times over the years, but the reaction of the Department of Justice to Native Americans filing a lawsuit was like night and day worse than anything I'd ever experienced in my life. So it was a very, very tough haul. But when I look out today and I see this huge room full of Native American farmers and ranchers and this big group of young people who are rising up, and I see all the things you're doing, and I get just totally choked up. And thank you.
And I want to pull on that thread a little bit. You made mention of, key lawsuits, but it wasn't just in the court that we were able to advocate for true parity and access to programming, and where we continue to advocate for access to resources for our communities to promote economic development through our food systems revitalization efforts. It really does take a multifaceted effort. I'd really love to hear from folks on the panel, taking us forward, through the Keepseagle settlement era. We actually have a lead plaintiff here on stage with us. What did it mean for you all when there was a court decision issued? And what did that tell you about the work that still lay ahead? Porter?
It meant a lot to me. I didn't really think through lead plaintiff when they asked me to be. Didn't really know what it was. Spent hours and hours in conference calls with lawyer talk. It's not my dialect at all. Like I said, I'm just a simple rancher, so I was playing from behind all the time. But for the end result to come out, maybe I put too much pressure on myself. Maybe I overplayed the role. But once I did get in it and realize what the hell it was, and I realized that I'm answering for all of our Native members behind me, then hell, I was more scared of the devil himself than to lose for the people behind me. And I took it as a lot of pressure. I just felt like one wrong word, one wrong move, and it's all over with, and listen to the elders, carrying the elders' stories, I didn't want to mess that up. It was a lot. And as we got in negotiations, there again, it's kind of one of the biggest horse trades I was ever in. You didn't want to sell out too soon because you got all the people behind you, but the way it worked out, we wound up negotiating out 98% of what we could have won if we'd went to court and won everything. So I was extremely relieved when it all come out and the way that it did, because like I said, maybe I put too much pressure on myself. Maybe I overplayed the role, but I just could not bear to have my tribal members, our tribal members behind me, to lose something for them. So I didn't really think it through, but it worked out.
Sarah?
It took lawyers to go into court, but we were telling the stories of the lead plaintiffs, and I can't tell you how important they were and how hard it was for them. And I got a story about Porter. Porter lived in Way Out, that's the name of his town, I think, Way Out, Oklahoma. He had you'd always talk about he had a 2.5-hour drive to the nearest airport, the 50-mile driveway, all that stuff, And we would have meetings, and typically those meetings would be in North Dakota. And we would give Porter a little bit of notice that we had to have a meeting. Especially in the negotiation phase, we had to fly everything by our lead plaintiffs. And so we'd call up Porter and say, well, there's going to be a meeting in Bismarck in a day or something like that. So Porter would get in the car or truck, and he would drive to North Dakota from Oklahoma. And he'd go to the meeting, and then one of those times, he heard that there was a blizzard warning coming. So he drove all the way back to Oklahoma that same day, that night. After a 2-hour meeting. And Lori, we owed so much to the wisdom of the lead plaintiffs, and they're all listed on the pleadings and so on. But Porter was our Oklahoma representative, and Oklahoma had about 50% of the Native American farmers and ranchers at the time, so he had a heavy load and a very long drive.
Zach, I'm going to ask you to pull us to present day, to the era of the new FSA Farm Loan Rule. What did it mean for you to not only serve as the first American Indian administrator for the agency, but also to get to lead the team that put into effect the Enhancing Program Access and Delivery for Farm Loans? And what role may this have in fundamentally changing the role of lending and access to credit for Indian producers?
One of my proudest achievements is your FSA administrator for the last 4 years. Yeah, first Native American FSA administrator, but getting that rule across the line. But the fact that the stories that I was able to tell from my work in Indian country in the last 30 years, from the work of advocates in the last 50 years all across the country, resonated with our career staff so much that if I'd have fallen off the face of the earth after I was here with you last year, the rule was going to get done. That team believes in it. DC career staff believe in it. Many of your farm loan chiefs are all in on this. It's a fundamental change, and it's like somebody was listening to the complaints of Porter and Sarah and Luann and Randy Roth and Ross and Greg Smitman and Lonnie Racehorse and all of the, some of the folks in the crowd here that I've had a chance to work with. The things that you told us, we put into that rule. Never in the history of working with producers that need access to credit have I heard anybody say, I would sure like to pay this money back faster, and I would like to pay more for the privilege of having that money. And by the way, I've got more assets. Why don't you take them as security, including my house? We took all of that off the table with this farm loan rule. We will not take more than 125% security on a loan. Previous interpretation was 150% or more. We will give you better terms on your loan if it helps you keep more of your production income in your pocket. And last, and as important as anything, we will not take the primary residence of the family as security if we can secure that loan one-to-one without it. So when agriculture doesn't go as we plan, sometimes that happens despite everybody's best efforts, you at least know you're going to have a roof for your kids still. And you don't have the family home in jeopardy. But part and parcel of that is using that farmer advocate mindset that was groomed here at the IAC and imbuing that in our local staff, in our career staff, so that they'll carry this forward. Because unfortunately, I'm unemployed in about 6 weeks. So I'm glad Porter's saying all these nice things in case any of you are hiring. I do a pretty good job scooping poop too. So, but I think that's the key, and we've got to hold the line. Because of the timing of that rule, it's susceptible to what's called a Congressional Review Act repeal. So if two sides of Congress, the House and the Senate, both agree that they want to walk back any or all rules that happened in the last 6 months, they can. All of that work is in jeopardy if we don't let our congressional delegations know what we think of it. I can't tell you what to tell them. I can tell you what I think of the rule. You can hear from this panel what that rule stands to change if we can preserve it. But we need to make sure that it's safe from a broad Congressional Review Act repeal so that we hold the line and we continue to fight.
And Sarah, I'd maybe like to turn it over to you to share a little bit about what it means to use a voice to communicate how important these positive changes are to protect. And what are different outlets or mechanisms that we have? You know, everybody in this space is, you know, still bearing a pen writing this story. Some literally, like Sarah as an author. But how do we continue to use this voice that we have, and what are the different outlets for us to ensure that this very meaningful message is received by the decision makers?
I think the IAC itself is critical to that outreach. I think people are scattered throughout the United States. Everybody has a governor. Everybody has 2 senators. Everybody has, well, I'd say members of the House of Representatives, except North Dakota. We only have 1. So, like reaching out to them and saying that these rules cannot cannot be disturbed, and make that the very, very highest priority. I must admit, I'm a bit demoralized about the results of the election, but the fight goes on. I mean, we've been through Richard Ling, the ugly guy, who, you know, I've got a little, I can't even keep track of all the secretaries of agriculture that were in place during the 20 years of litigation, but there's a ton of them. And the stick-to-itiveness, I think, of Native American agriculture and the people, the farmers and ranchers, and the young people who want to be farmers and ranchers is the biggest strength, because other people may give up their attachment to the land, but I don't see that ever in Indian country. I see like this link to the land and to the future generations and to former generations as the sort of the guiding principle of the work of this organization and other organizations that are like sister organizations, IAC, like NAF and others. So I'd say work together, never give up, and think about the past and think about the future. And speak out. Be crabby.
Porter, yeah, that's worth a round of applause. Porter, I wonder if you'd like to build on this. Do you know of any other ways? I mean, you, in your past experience on the Council for Native American Farming and Ranching, you know the importance of using your voice to inform recommendations. What might you add?
I would add, just echo kind of what Zach has said. Contact your state representatives, your senators, your congressmen, tell them to leave these rules in place. This is what we've been working on. Give it a chance. Give it a chance and let's see how it works. I mean, this is what we need. You know, through the Keep Seal, there's been the council you mentioned was actually set up for, I believe, 7 years, and it had to expire. Well, now Native farmers and ranchers need to know this. There is a committee out there, the Technical Advisory Committee, which is patterned after the council. It is a very strong tool for a farmer and rancher to have in his toolbox for making changes, policy changes in USDA. I've often referred to them as an express lane to get things done. But it's called TAC. It's the Technical Advisory Committee. They have high-ranking USDA officials that sit on that board with them. I believe the original council, there was a seat there for the secretary to sit. I don't know if that was pushed through or not, but they have a direct ear to the secretary. Another thing that come out of this is NAFS, Native American Financial Services. You'll start seeing more about it. It's in the process of getting stood up. It come out of NAF, it come out of the Keep Siegel. It is a lending institution geared directly for Native farmers and ranchers. I don't know the exact, but it should be stood up in the next 6 months, I would think. They got some good people working on it. But put that TAC in your toolbox. I promise you, if you're dealing with USDA, they have power. They can help you. It's a great little group. I mean, it's a powerful little group, and there's got some really good people on there too. So, but your NAFs and TAC, I mean, there was 2 things that come out of that I'm pretty proud of. To help navigate the waters of USDA and to also put another lending institution out there for natives. So I'm pretty proud of that stuff.
Wonderful. And what Porter's mentioning here, beginning this afternoon at 1 o'clock, there will be the USDA Tribal Advisory Committee convening. Those convenings are always open to the public. They meet in person twice per year and virtually twice per year. Those meetings also are open to the public. There's going to be a public comment period today. So in your handy dandy attendee app, on your CVent app on your smartphone or in your paper copy, you'll be able to find the information on where you can join the Tribal Advisory Committee and offer public comment and be able to help to inform their first set of recommendations slated to be finalized this week during their fourth convening as a seated committee. I want to just orient us towards the future a bit as we plan to wrap up this great conversation today. It's apparent to me that we could have had 3 days to dig into this topic, and I understand why some of Sarah's early conversations with IAC went till 5 in the morning drinking coffee. There's just so much here. We have such meaningful stories, and the ability to connect with one another is truly where those stories come to life. And so I would love it if the panel would all share any parting message they may have for folks that are attending. And in case you're not familiar, over 1,200 attendees this year. And yeah, within that attendee base, a large number of public servants, community protectors, folks who are consistently leaving home to help others and leaving behind their own obligations at home to help others. And that can be really grueling work. It can really wear on you to have to walk into hearing some of these stories. But the work is only done because of folks like you all in the audience today. What might be parting words of advice that you all would share with our attendees as they venture into this week together? And any maybe last calls to action?
A couple from me. County committee elections just wrapped up. We're going to have another round of county committee elections next year. Get your name on a ballot. Participate. Bring your voice to the table for producers that are in similar circumstances to you. Because if someone isn't there at that table making decisions with them on their mind, they become an afterthought and they become victim to the discretion that's given to our local offices. And this is more for the IAC as an organization and other organizations that are here. Build coalitions. When this thing started and those guys went into that office and the Secretary of Agriculture pointed them over to C Street, to the BIA, within 5 years, because they built a coalition, Indian country and other producers received a higher cost share on NRCS practices because of the work of those few folks. We've got other entities out there that the USDA has been very intentional about standing up and getting resources to. We've got our conservation districts. We've got tribal governments using these cooperative agreements. We've got the Federation of Southern Cooperatives of the National Black Growers Council, Rural Coalition. Build that coalition of support, because the only way they're going to defeat what you all are doing is by to keep dividing you. So let's pull together. Let's leverage our ability to network amongst these organizations now that they've got resources provided by the federal government. And in 2038, that will be the farm bill of the underserved producers.
Anything you'd like to add, Sarah or Porter?
I'm going to be brief. I'm going to say what Zach said.
I'll be brief, and I want to speak to the youth here on the floor. Set your mind to what you want to do and don't take no for an answer. Work your tail off to get to that goal. I promise you, you can get there. So keep fighting the fight. Kelsey, thank you, and thank IAC for allowing me to do this. But thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I just want to appreciate all of the work that all three of you have done, ensuring credit is where it is due. We are in a new era in being able to see economic development in our food systems out there in Indian country. It takes advocates like you all to make sure that that is the case. And it takes producers and young people motivated to come home to our communities to also make that happen. Without folks in our communities being ready to use these newly refined farm loan programs, being willing to walk back into that USDA service center yet again, the change is for naught. And so thank you all for the role that you have played in informing credit getting to where it is due. And I'm looking forward to the work that we're going to get to have together in 2025 working on this effort.